go over the key concepts and how they are relevant to the most portentous goals of our time. Achieving sustainable development for all of humanity, all 7, and soon enough 9 billion of us. When it comes right down to it, sufficiency economy philosophy posits that a good society is built on basis of economic drives and decisions, processes and institutions, as well as systems and dynamics that adhere to the following 3 principles: moderation, reasonableness, and prudence. Indeed, one will find evidence of moderation, reasonableness, and prudence mindset embedded across many of the world's cultures and intellectual traditions. Still, let's go over them one by one. First, moderation, which has both quantitative and qualitative dimensions. Quantitative moderation means not too much, and also not too little. This applies to everything, from aspiration of an individual person to goal setting at an international level. Qualitative moderation refers to the ideation that an optimal path to the desired end must not be ones that take us to the extremes, one way or the other. Not too much, and also not too little, like when a Swede utters lagom and lifts the happy thumb. Often cited in reference to the Eastern notion of middle path, moderation is also best approximated by the Western notion of optimality, which itself, to be sure, is certainly not guaranteed by averaging 2 wrong solutions, or worse, averaging a true solution with a false one. Second, reasonableness, which is to say that any judgment or position that is capable of withstanding reason is certainly one that is based on an enlightened notion of causality. Reasonableness focuses on causal nexus, the connection between causes and effects, hence the recognition that each problem is but an effect of its own causes, and equally that each solution is itself a cause of some other effects, many of which are unintended, counterproductive even. But of course, with each effect having multiple causes, chains of causation going back seemingly forever, the moderation principle also says that one does not necessarily go after the ultimate root causes. Rather, one prioritizes the targets of action, and instead of tracing the causal chains all the way back ad infinitum, one intervenes precisely where one has the know-how, the capacity, the authority, and/or responsibility to do so. Let's take an example, a community reforestation project, whereas a quote-unquote result-oriented approach might simply call on village volunteers to go out and plant as many seedlings as possible. An SEP-oriented approach might uncover that in many locales, the lack of seedlings is not the problem. Instead, seedlings never take hold because the soil is too dry. So the problem is water or rainfall, or lack thereof, right? Not so fast, for in many locales, low precipitation isn't the problem either. It turns out that due to illegal logging and deforestation, seasonal rains upstream turn to flash floods downstream. Now, tracing causation back this far may not prove all that helpful, as the villages themselves may not have the wherewithal or the stomach to take on illegal loggers, with connection to corrupt politicians, say. Too late, anyway. But there is something they can do. They can install some sort of local speed bumps for water to slow down enough to be naturally ground absorbed, with sufficient soil humidity. The seedlings can take hold, and voila, the land reforests itself. Neat. Third, prudence. The conscious and consensuous commitment to safeguard, or in other words, immunize oneself, one's economy, society, and environment against future threats, as well as build up resilience, for when downside risks cannot be entirely anticipated or simply overwhelm the prepared defense, namely the risk mitigation measures. Immunity building is related to, but more encompassing, a principle that the requirement to put in place effective risk management regimes. In fact, prudence calls for immunization, vis-a-vis breakdown of fragile assumptions, implicit in risk management models themselves. Nowhere is the case more damning than with the 2008 global financial subprime mortgage crisis. Also, we tend to think of resilience in passive terms. That is, if an economy can withstand several external shocks or pick itself right back up after a crisis, then we consider it de facto a proven resilient economy. With SEP, resilience is best thought of as an input parameter vis-a-vis the very design of a balanced and robust economy. Now, to ensure that such a society follows and indeed stick to this optimal path all the way to realizing balanced, inclusive, equitable growth, thereby ensuring secure, prosperous, sustainable future for our next generations, sufficiency economy philosophy further posits two conditionalities, namely, the care and governance by which knowledge is applied to the planning and execution of enterprises in all forms and at all levels, together with a set of necessary virtues that weaves ethical, personal, and professional integrity into the very fabric of nationhood and global citizenry. And now, let's shift gear and go from SEP, Sufficiency Economy Philosophy, to SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. Many of us are familiar with the paradox of development imperatives. On the one hand, hitherto impoverished nations have every right to aspire to a higher standard of living, closer to what affluent nations already enjoy. On the other hand, there are just so many of us in the developing world, it would be practically impossible, not to mention environmentally disastrous, to replicate the same path to progress and economic prosperity. It would take many times over the planetary resources. This is very precisely where moderation, reasonableness, and prudence come in. The goal of development should not be to make poor countries rich by the same definition, but rather to ensure economic sufficiency and human dignity in the lives and livelihoods of all. As a matter of fact, development is not just poor countries' problem. Rich countries need to make progress, not from having a little to having a lot of material wealth, but progress in terms of making the transition from exhaustive and exploitative production consumption patterns to renewable and regenerative paradigms. Sufficiency economy philosophy is thus eminently germane to the global dialogue on sustainable development in general, as well as the global effort to implement all 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals in particular. The triple principles of moderation, reasonableness, and prudence, coupled with the double conditionalities vis-a-vis knowledge and virtues, can help to safeguard the scale and scope of sustainable development goals from being too ambitious, as well as not being ambitious enough to safeguard sustainable development programs from overlooking the very causality that has led humanity onto this unsustainable path to begin with. And that has to do with the fact that collectively, humanity has been operating with a precarious mindset, one that has been paradoxical from the very beginning of modernity. It says that humankind can, and indeed should strive to exert increasing control over nature, make our local patch of planetary real estate super friendly and conducive to our consumption and lifestyles, and yet, in so doing, the total ecological environmental impacts from everything we do will be strictly local, localized in space and in time. Just think of the lifetime of plastic, a few minutes hauling groceries, followed by a millennium as landfill. In that capacity, sufficiency economy represents the philosophical encapsulation of an altogether different mindset for mankind, one that places humankind's aspiration in equilibrium with the Earth's systems and dynamics, individual persons' pursuits in concord with society's processes and institutions, and our inner being's predisposition in harmony with our outer selves' drives and decisions. Humanity has thus to graduate from economics of exploitations to economics of moderation. Together, let's make achieving social, cultural, economic, and environmental sustainability a credible, vibrant, and viable post-millennial goal for humanity. And that includes all of us, some of whom are alive today, most of whom are yet to be born, into this wonderful planet we call home.